Welcome to 10-Minute University's Noontime Chat. I'm Cheryl, and it's my pleasure today to talk to you about some ways to garden with children. If you're lucky enough to have young people in your life, whether it's a child, a grandchild, a niece or nephew, or even neighbor children, I hope I can give you some ideas on ways you can engage them in good, best gardening practices. Today's class is a 10-minute university presentation of Clackamas County Master Gardeners, offered in collaboration with and in support of the OSU Extension Service Master Gardener Program. The objectives today are to discuss ways to introduce and involve children of all ages in hands-on science and engage in good gardening practices, to learn about age-specific activities that will light a spark and create a lifelong interest in gardening, and explore how to use fiction and nonfiction books to inform and entertain children on the topic of gardening. Why garden with children? Well, children benefit enormously from the sensory stimulation encountered during gardening, whether it's pouring water from a container to water plants or working in the soil to remove weeds. It's an opportunity for them to experience the cycle of life firsthand, and it teaches responsibility and engenders creativity. Gardening can provide hours of quality time each week together, and it encourages a child's interest in the workings of science and nature. Building future gardeners is important. As our populations increase and children are busy with their scheduled activities, they are not in daily contact with nature, and lots is lost for them. They no longer see themselves as connected to nature and fail to understand that we're really reliant on gardens to provide us with food or just pleasing sensory experiences. Children are interested in different things at different ages and different interests, but there's an activity to engage everyone. Young children have a shorter attention span and want a change of activity every 20 to 30 minutes. But older children can engage in more long-range activities that can take days or even weeks to complete. But there are some things to consider before you even get started. For one thing, keep it small. A smaller space is more manageable. Start small and increase the space with age and interest. If you live in an apartment or condominium, you will need to be creative and find a deck, a balcony, or some front steps as a space for a garden to grow. Use serious work tools. Do not give them plastic tools that may break and make them frustrated. Adjust the amount of work to fit the child and the time frame. Remember, it's important to make the experience rewarding for both of you. So be sure to think about the scope of the activities you're going to do and quit before anyone becomes overwhelmed or frustrated. And that includes the adults. With luck and proper planning, you can all enjoy the fruits of your labors. For this presentation, I have grouped activities by age group, but every child is different. So these are just a guideline, not locked in stone. Ideas for 4 to 7-year-olds. The following activities that are listed here are a suggestion for this presentation. They've been all organized in a row here. There are many more activities you can engage in, but I had to narrow it down somewhere I could keep you here forever and ever. Go on a slug and a snail hunt. Now this activity is wonderful for 4 to 7-year-olds. There are 124 species of slugs and snails in Oregon, and I am hoping that you will not find all of them in your garden. These are some of the varieties found in the gardens of the Pacific Northwest. The banana slug, which is native and beneficial. And I've never seen one in my garden. I usually see them when I'm out hiking or in the forest. The leopard slug, the common gray slug, and roundback slug. I'm sad to tell you I've seen all of these in my yard, but you'll probably most commonly find the common gray slug. And while we may judge them to be pests who eat large holes in our plants, particularly our hosta, they do contribute to the ecosystem. They're food for salamanders and snakes. Some snails you find are going to be native to the Pacific Northwest. And the good guys feed on fungi, the ones that are native to us, and decaying material, which is a good thing. But unfortunately, there are imports that got here by train or boat, and they feed on living material as well as the fungus and other decaying matter in the garden. They can be beautiful, and since they decompose material, they are an important link in the ecological chain. I have included a wonderful link here that contains fabulous information on slugs and snails, and it will help with the identification of those critters you find. Before you head outside to hunt, though, take some time to do some reading. These 3 books are examples of a couple of great picture books that inform and entertain. There are many more like it at the library. It will give you an opportunity to learn something about slugs and snails before you start, and you'll also enjoy the fun and informative storylines. Let the hunt begin. Remember, this activity is best done early in the morning, which is pretty perfect considering this age group is ready to go when the sun comes up, or after dark. And in that case, you can add flashlights to your search, or even maybe a headlamp to get the excitement going. A magnifying glass is also quite useful. I confess, after we identify them, if they happen to be not great good guys, I let the kids drop them into a bucket of soapy water to be disposed of later. Find the decomposers in the garden. Now, as I said, some species of snail that are native to the Pacific Northwest do decompose, but there are other wonderful decomposers in the garden. Worms, sow bugs, ants, and spiders are all essential in breaking down organic matter into humus. It's important that children can see them as contributing to the garden environment. As they hunt for these critical decomposers, they may even come upon the larva of a beetle or other beneficial insect in the garden, stimulating another conversation. They may also encounter insects that are not good guys or are just nuisance bugs like box elder bugs, which kids always find because they're on the sides of the home. They're a nuisance, but not harmful. I have found the best way to do this activity is to take a bucket and collect garden soil from around the yard, get a plastic tarp or plastic sheet and dump your contents of your bucket on that and spread it out for examination. They can use their magnifiers, try to identify each of the insects they find, and then return it all to the garden. Pretty neat because it doesn't get too messy. Also, don't forget to check under stones or pots, as that's where you will find many sow bugs. And they sometimes get a bad rap because they are where things are kind of yucky and decaying, but they're really good guys. I would like to encourage you to repeat this activity throughout the season. Children need to repeat experiences and be given time to explore and reflect on what they find. Again, follow up with some factual information using books. These 3 books are great examples of material that can answer questions generated by the exploration of the soil. And it can also be a springboard for other activities, an ant farm or a worm bin. I'll talk more about compost worm bins later. But I do know that when I was dealing with 4 to 7-year-olds, when my grandchildren were that size, and they want to see how a worm tunnels, you can just take a mason jar, no lid, fill it with soil and worms, put black paper around the outside of the jar overnight, and the next morning the children can uncover or take the paper off and they can see the worm tunnels right next to the glass, which is fascinating for them. This age group loves that. There's nothing more fun than planting seeds for pumpkins. The seeds are large, so this age group has an easy time handling them. And there are so many different varieties, from small decorative pumpkins to large ones for carving. It introduces the 4 to 7-year-old children to seed packets and the information that's provided on there on how to get the best results when planting. For example, you often need to nick the seeds or soak them for quicker germination. And be sure to read the packet carefully. I realize that pumpkins take up a lot of space, but they can be trellised and trained. And I've seen some pretty creative gardeners train them up around, particularly if they have them planted in pots, but they train the vine up. Very creative. and grow an extra one to share with your friends. But no matter what variety of pumpkin you select, they need warm soil, 50 degrees or more, in order to germinate properly. If you need to make a little temporary greenhouse, you can cut the bottom off a large plastic jug or pop container, set it over your new planted seeds, watch for the seedlings to grow, remove the jugs when the seedlings appear. This will also encourage the children to check on their seeds daily, to watch for the little seedlings to appear. It's a good habit to get into. I've chosen 3 books here that discuss how a pumpkin grows from seed to pumpkin. And there are so many titles out there. You would just be amazed. It's important to try to find titles and content that address the growing process rather than the Halloween aspects of pumpkin growing. You'll be pleased to find many titles that are equal to this task. There's nothing more fun than carving your initials in young pumpkin fruit. And then as the season grows along, watch the initials grow with the pumpkin. They love that. They can plant a flower garden. Everyone loves an attractive bed of flowers. And for 4 to 7-year-old children, it's a chance to observe what insects come to visit their garden. With a little guidance and some encouragement, they can choose flower seeds that will attract butterflies, bees, and birds. I've included a link that will give you a list of plants that will attract beneficial insects. Sunflowers, zinnias, or nasturtiums, easy to grow and come in many colors. Not only attractive, but food for pollinators. Planting seeds in small containers will give them a head start and also will allow the children to get a close look at the germination process. It's a wonderful hands-on activity, and you can place the seedlings next to a window, or if the weather has turned warm enough outside. Remember, seedlings are tender. It needs to be at least 50 degrees at night to place seedlings outside. If you wish to wait until the soil warms up, you can sow those seeds directly into the soil. The seeds will be a bit smaller and harder for the children to handle. So it's important to get guidance from you for spacing and depth of planting. And again, you'll find many books that will talk about seed to plant, the tiny seed, planting a rainbow, so it can help you plan your garden. On to the bigger guys, 8 to 10-year-olds. Now these guys are ready for some more complicated projects, and planting vegetables and flowers will keep them challenged, but not overwhelmed. They probably have a little experience with seeds and plants, but have yet to learn the how-tos of developing a vegetable or flower garden. They're capable kids. If you're working with 8 to 10-year-olds, have had a conversation with them, you'll understand that they have ideas about the kinds of things they would like to grow. So allow them to do some planning of the garden. They'll need guidance on soil preparation. Good time to have them think more about soil and how they can encourage healthy practices of adding amendments like compost, or check the pH of the soil for acidity before adding a fertilizer. They will also need you to model for them the selection of seeds for disease resistance and help with strategies for cereal planting or just use of space. Now's the time for them to learn about integrated pest management, which I will address a little later in this presentation. Before you begin, you should decide, what do you want to plant in your vegetable garden? Should be the vegetables you enjoy, whether it's lettuce and tomatoes or carrots, radishes, and turnips. That would make a difference in how you proceed. Select a site in the ground or in pots that will allow at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight daily. Space may be an issue, so you might have to get pretty creative. You can plant on a front porch in pots or convert a former flower bed into a vegetable garden, which will produce something for your table. Providing a trellis or to train vining plants up instead of out can allow you more space for other plants. I've seen people grow potatoes in large tubs or herbs in an old boot. Let your imagination go. Also remember that because you water a potted plant more often, it will leach the nutrients out of your soil. So you will need to use a soluble fertilizer regularly to replace any nutrients that are lost through the watering. And remember, keep it manageable. Don't overwhelm your young gardener. A small, successful bed is better than a large, neglected bed that you don't have time to give the care that it requires. Check the pH of the soil. The Clackamas County Master Gardeners are doing free pH testing at the Spring Garden Fair this coming weekend, located at the Canby Event Center. They're there April 30th and May the 1st. If you have your soil tested there for pH, they will make recommendations on what needs to be added to the soil. You can also purchase a soil testing kit at your local nursery. They're easy to use, but may not offer you enough information on what additions will be helpful. A pH of 6.0 to 7.5 is the best for vegetable gardens. Adding compost to a vegetable bed adds nutrients to the soil, and if the soil test so indicates, then you should make an addition and some fertilizer may be added as well. The objective here is to let children know that quality soil will produce larger, more abundant crops. And they may get hung up about the stinky or icky use of manure or other composting materials that may have fragrance, but remind them this is science and a proven best practice. Again, use this opportunity to do some reading about soils, plants, and seed types, and discuss what vegetables do y'all like to eat. Try to grow at least one vegetable that is unfamiliar to the children. Maybe they've never seen broccoli, cauliflower, or cabbage grown in the garden. Time to give it a try. Now the fun begins, selecting seeds and plants. You may choose to sow your seeds directly into the soil or purchase plants from a nursery. Either way, remember, the soil needs to be warm enough to allow them to grow. Cold, wet soil will cause the seeds and plants to fail. Don't rush the planting process. It's the most common mistake made by beginning gardeners, so don't fall for that. The soil should be at least 50 degrees or more for seeds to germinate properly. If you can, you should try to acquire a soil thermometer. They are sold in nursery stores throughout the area. It's fun for the children to run around the yard and test the temperature of soil in different locales of the garden. I have to admit, even I like to do that. Keep it fun. How about growing pole beans on a teepee shape? Makes for a wonderful hiding spot when the plants are fully grown. Also, choose unusual cultivars like, purple beans. It makes the project engaging. The link I provided on letting soil temperature guide you when planting vegetables should be helpful, but I've given you a lot of information and a lot of links. And the reason I have is that if you model researching before you start, even though you're maybe a seasoned gardener, you garden all the time, you know this stuff backwards and forwards. If you model looking it up, they will copy you. And this reference is a great one. You can look up the vegetables you want to plant and find out what temperature the soil needs to be or the ambient air before you plant. The seeds that do best when seeded directly into the soil of a pot or a plot of soil are beets, radishes, turnips, and salad greens like arugula. But these seeds are quite small and can be frustrating for the children to manage, the grown-ups too. They are hard. Consider making your own seed tape. You can make your own seed tape by using single-ply toilet paper and some glue. Fold and cut the toilet paper into 2 long strips, then fold the strips in half so you have a place to put glue on one side with a brush. Using a ruler, place the tiny seeds the appropriate distance apart and allow the glue to dry. It works well to take the strips to dry if you hang them over a pole, or I used a broomstick in the garage, or if you have another rack that you can use to hang them on. When they're all dry, you can place the paper with the seeds attached into the soil at the correct depth. Check your seed packet for spacing and depth information. And also make sure you label the row you've planted. I always use dollar store purchased popsicle sticks and a permanent marker to label my rows. To soak or not to soak. Some vegetable seeds you select may require a nicking of the seed coat and are overnight and soaking overnight before planting. It'll shorten the germination period since it allows the water to penetrate the seed coat and will stimulate the tiny embryo inside to sprout. Crops that like to be soaked: peas, beans, pumpkins, squash, beets, and generally any seed with a thick coat. After soaking, they can be planted the depth and distance apart as indicated on the seed packet. I love this picture, the middle picture of a bean seed split open. I soaked a 1 pound bag of lima bean seeds in water, and to demonstrate to the children how there's a seed coat and there's a tiny little embryo. And what amazes me most is that we assume that if they've seen it once, that that's enough, but they want to do it over and over and over again. We did every seed. They just need a repeat of that activity. Interesting. It's interesting to me. You can also use transplants. Something else as you consider is planting your seeds in small pots. Remember to mark your pots as you did with the seeds planted in the ground with a stick or a marker, or heated sealing trays, and transplant them into the garden when they are mature enough. It makes the gardening process easy, and particularly for the control of weeds, it will give you a head start with your plants. You can also look for high quality starts that are not root bound, not stunted or off color at your local garden store. Remember, the use of pesticides and herbicides should be minimal, particularly with vegetables or things you're going to eat. It's important to teach them to use common sense practices to avoid problems with insects and diseases of plants before they develop. Many herbicides and pesticides are toxic and unsafe for use around the food you eat. Integrated pest management means to be responsible tending your garden. Watch for pests like slugs or aphids. Watch for signs of plant damage, black spots, which could be frass or insect poop, say poop and you've probably lost them, or notches and holes in your plants. Also be sure to check the undersides of the leaves of your plants. That's where those pesky slugs like to hide. Drop them in soapy water. If you find eggs or small larvae, squash them. Look for signs of egg laying or deformity in the leaves, and research ways to solve the problem without using chemicals. Always remove any weed that threatens to crowd out your young seedling or transplant. In other words, you need to be a member of the Pest and Weed Patrol. Remember, OSU Extension has information on pests and non-toxic measures to eliminate plant damage and death. The more often you patrol your garden, the better. I have included a link to the common weeds you will find in the garden. Build a worm bin. This is so much fun. Children enjoy watching worms of all types, and there are thousands of earthworm species in the world. They're a welcome sight in any garden as they turn the leaves and other garden debris into lovely castings, and as they churn the earth looking for food and pooping it out, these wonderful castings. And if you say poop, you've hooked them right there. They will also recycle your food waste and produce some compost for your potted plants or vegetable garden in just a few months. You'll need a home for them in a convenient but cool place that is free of freezing temperatures and direct sunlight. What kind of worms? Well, there are all kinds of worms in the world, but red worms are very well suited for a worm bin and can be purchased through suppliers online. They usually sell other composting materials as well. And red worms prefer fruit and vegetable scraps, which most households produce regularly. If you estimate the weight of your household food waste per day, you can determine the weight of worms that you'll need. Rule of thumb, 2 pounds of worms are needed for each pound of kitchen waste per day. 1 pound of worms equals 1 to 2,000 worms. Worm bins can be homemade or purchased. This is something you and your garden buddy can talk it over. It may be easier if you begin with a plastic bin, but you will need to punch aeration holes in the sides and the tops, as air circulation is very important. or you can buy a suitably sized worm bin that is built for that purpose. The bedding can be made of newspaper strips and wood shavings, though not cedar ones, or coconut fiber. The container should be filled about 80% full of the bedding material, and then you add water until it is dripping wet. It should be wet when you squeeze it with your hand. When the worms are first placed in the worm bin, it's a big celebration day when that happens, by the way, leave the lid off, since the worms don't like sunlight, then that'll encourage them to burrow down deep into the bedding. Think carefully about where you're going to place your worm bin, as it needs to allow for air circulation, but not be in direct sunlight, and certainly not freezing temperatures. But it also needs to be kind of convenient for the addition of food scraps. People generally choose a garage or porch area out of sunlight, and a basement works well, but sometimes it's prohibitive to go down the stairs all the time to put the scraps in. Now you can begin to feed them scraps from your kitchen. Notice the list does not include any oily foods or any pet waste. To discourage offensive smells when you add scraps, pull back the bedding and bury it a little bit. It discourages any vinegar flies, which are harmless but kind of annoying. After several months, much of the bedding will turn into dark, crumbly worm castings and will be found at the bottom of the bin. It's time to remove the finished composted material and the liquid and spread it around your garden or potted plants. When I did this activity, we used a plastic tarp to empty the worm bin contents and then carefully harvested the compost. Before returning the worms back to the bin, we added new bedding material up to the 80% level and then returned the remaining worms and uncomposted material back into the bin. Since red worms need a lot of moisture, I once again added water until it was well soaked but not flooded. And I do have to, full disclosure, we did end up, I let an unsupervised individual fill the water up, and then they can be drowned. And so be very careful. It's a good idea to monitor the moisture and make sure the worms are getting an adequate amount, but not going glub, glub, glub. The resources I have listed here are great. Both the handout about worm composting and the book by Mary Applehoff. She's even produced a video, which is very informative. Wonderful worm compost. A hands-on science for the children, great for the garden. This is an activity for the whole family, and I hope you'll give it some consideration. It builds so much awareness of how decomposers work and the biology of worms. And also, if you're a fisherman, these worms are great bait. As they multiply, it's possible to harvest a few for a little fishing time. For those children who don't like the notion of growing vegetables, then consider having them help you plant a pollinator garden. It will attract essential pollinators to your yard and garden spaces, and it is beautiful to behold. Who are the pollinators? Ants, bees, beetles, butterflies, flies, birds, hummingbirds, moths. Well, what makes them so important? According to the United States Department of Agriculture, about 80% of all flowering plants and over 3/4 of the staple crop plants that feed humankind rely on animal pollinators. Almost all flowering plants require pollination, so they are the ultimate essential worker, and we should encourage and care for the environment in which they work and reproduce. Now's the time to go out into your garden before you even start planning your pollinator garden and make a note of how many pollinators you find. Use a clipboard or a notebook and write down who you see, where they are working, and what has attracted them. Make particular note of the colors and shapes of the flowers of the plants they land upon. Flower shape and size provides a visual clue and a structure that allows a specific pollinator to contact the flower's anthers and stigmas. Beetle pollinated flowers tend to have larger and a more open shape that provides an easy landing pad, such as the zinnia that's pictured here. Since beetles are not as agile in flight as other flying insects, they need kind of a large landing field. And non-hovering pollinators require landing pads so they can rest or feed and contact the flower's pollen. The long nectar spurs of plants in the mint family protect the nectar from being stolen by robber insects and allows the nectar to be accessed by specific pollinators, hawk moths, butterflies, and hummingbirds that can access the nectar with their long proboscis or a long, narrow bill. I've included a link to the 10-minute university handout on plants that attract pollinators that you and your budding gardener will find pretty helpful. Well, these are just a few of the books, titles of books that will inform the children about pollinator work and what plants they're attracted to and why. Your local librarian can help you find these or others. One of my all-time favorites is The Reason for a Flower. It's a very, very comprehensive book and enjoyable to read. There are many resources with lists of native, perennial, and annual plants that attract pollinators. Select the ones you enjoy for your garden: salvias, yarrow, zinnias, sunflowers, catmint, and herbs like rosemary and lavender, or large shrubs like ceanothus, which is California lilac, and manzanita. All of them will bring bright blooms and pollinators to a new flower bed. We've already discussed soil preparation, and you may be converting an existing flower bed into a pollinator bed. So adding amendments may be necessary. And of course, you will make sure that your new plants are soaked in water very well before you place them in the ground. Make sure that the new bed gets 6 to 8 hours of sun per day, as the plants you select will perform best with that much sun. Pollinators are more active on sunny, less shaded gardens. Tall plants in the back, shorter varieties in the front will allow you to enjoy all the blooms throughout the summer and into the fall. This gives the young gardener an opportunity to learn the best ways to either train plants on a trellis or stake them up to prevent them from falling over onto other plants. Now these 11 to 13-year-olds, by the time children have reached the ages of 11 to 13, they've had a lot of experience with seed planting. It's a key component of the school curriculum. They should be ready for something a bit more ambitious that will allow them to make predictions, anticipate cause and effect, and observe outcomes. They'll benefit from experiencing the interdependence of plants and animals and the social responsibility that comes with being a gardening member of society. Keeping our soils free of pesticides and herbicides and contributing to the welfare of others by donating food is a step toward becoming a responsible member of society. These are some suggested projects to implement, and I know I've already talked about vegetable gardening, but building a raised vegetable bed, a bit more complex. Constructing a rain garden will contribute to a healthier environment by filtering stormwater that runs into our streams and attracting amphibians to the garden. It's just plain fun. It also teaches about the various microclimates you find in your own yard or garden. Now, I realize I've already discussed vegetable gardening for 8 to 10-year-olds, but the goal here is to give them more of a challenge and add interest as they grow older. Raised bed gardening has many advantages as it improves soil drainage and lets you have better access for the control of pests and weeds. And often a raised bed will yield a bigger harvest. You can construct a raised bed of any size and perhaps make use of a space that was not suitable for gardening before because it had poor drainage and difficult soil, but had enough sunlight to allow plants to flourish. A raised garden bed can be made of pressure-treated wood, concrete blocks, or recycled plastic. If it works better in your situation and you have a piece of ground that is 6 to 8 hours of sunlight, you can simply make pathways and mound the soil up. Whichever one will work best for your situation, just make sure that it has enough sunlight and an access to a source of water. You can add drip irrigation in a raised bed or even a bed that's raised in the soil. It's a bit more expensive, but will allow you to attach a timer for more controlled watering. And for those children who are interested in gadgetry, they love that kind of thing. They like to draw the plans. They like to manage the controlled watering. So it adds another layer of complexity for a young gardener. It might just be the hook that keeps them going too. As you can see from this slide, there are many styles of raised vegetable beds, but the most crucial component is the soil you choose to fill them with. Most people use a commercial topsoil for filling raised beds. It's usually a mixture of soil and organic material that will allow water to infiltrate and drain, while the organic compost increases the capacity of the fill to hold water and nutrients. The result will be a mix that drains water well, but dries out more quickly than most native soils. If you're using a mounded soil model, you can use the native soil from the pathways between the rows and add amendments to improve the soil profile as you mound the soil. Adding compost will help create structure and improve water movement. The beds will need to be reshaped each year to counter the effect of settling and erosion. But you will probably also need to add more topsoil or compost to the constructed raised beds periodically as well. Encourage your new gardener to plan for the best use of space and an opportunity to coordinate the timing of plantings and cereal plants so you can get the most from your space. The ideal vegetables for containers are those that don't take up a lot of space, such as carrots, radishes, lettuce, and parsley, or those that produce over a long period of time, such as tomatoes, peppers, herbs, and eggplants. In any case, be sure you plant what you like to eat. Make a sketch of your garden bed. Decide whether or not you will sow seeds directly into the soil or begin with grown or purchased transplants. Check the temperature of the soil. Make sure you're planting at an appropriate time. A caution to be sure and consider the budding gardener that you're working with has now just been lost in the mix. And sometimes I get going and I leave them behind. So you have to make sure they're not feeling overwhelmed. Start small, work up to a larger garden space when the time is right. To keep your vegetable garden at its best, be certain to monitor the growing plants for adequate water. Check for pests. We've already talked about integrated pest management and the reduction of herbicides and pesticides. Harvest the plants regularly and enjoy and share the fruits of your hard work. Grow a little extra in your garden so you can contribute to neighbors who may want or need fresh vegetables, or give it to the local food bank. It's a moment of pride to give to others, and it builds social responsibility. If, just like doing research on best practices, if we model sharing with and caring for others, the children will follow our example. How about building a rain garden? A rain garden is a special type of garden that collects water runoff from your roof or the street and allows it to soak into the ground by being filtered through the soil and plant roots. A rain garden is effective in removing up to 90% of nutrients and chemicals and up to 80% of sediments from the rainwater runoff. It allows the water to soak into the ground and renew the groundwater. It should be planted with a mixture of plants that should be able to tolerate both wet conditions when rainwater fills the garden and dry conditions when rain is scarce. It can be a beautiful low-maintenance garden that will attract wildlife as well as slowly absorb and filter stormwater, which in turn will protect our rivers and our streams. If you and your gardening buddy decide that a rain garden is just right for you, then the following steps should be employed. Select a site at least 10 feet from any structure in a low but well-drained area of the yard. It can't be an area of the yard that water just stands in. Remove the sod and dig a shallow depression about 6 inches deep. Slope the sides as you see in this diagram so that the water will be contained. Do not locate this over a septic tank or drain field. Also, it's best to be located at least 5 feet away from a sidewalk. I've included links with a great deal of information that you should read carefully before you begin planning a rain garden. Choose native plants. Now, this may be a whole new realm for the kids. They may not know what native plants are, but as you know, it's a plant that's part of the balance of nature that's been developed over hundreds of thousands of years in a specific region. They may never have heard of of such a thing, and this will be a nice exploration for you to do together. It will be fun, and you'll learn which plants will be best suited for your space and attract some wildlife. I've, of course, attached a link here that will be helpful in plant selection. And I don't mean to beat you to death with links, but I think sometimes a little information is helpful, and modeling for the children how to go to an educational site and research the information you want is excellent. Select plants suitable for the different water levels of your rain garden. In the bottom, use plants that like wetland grasses and sedges. And on the upland area, plant things like spirea, currant, and dogwood. Keep in mind the height and width of the plants when they mature. So take your sketch with you to the nursery. Be sure to intermingle wildflowers with the sedges and grasses, so a large or root mass is established. Something else to consider is to group like plants together. Groupings of 3 to 5 of the same plant makes a more attractive, more impacting statement than plants that are polka dotted around the space. You will need to water your new plant additions the first 2 weeks after planting. No fertilizer will be necessary, and your weeding should be minimal, but monitor the area. In early spring of the following year, after you've planted your first rain garden, you will need to cut down all the dead growth from the prior season to allow the plants to emerge as spring progresses. Pictured here is Joe Pieweed, which is a water and drought tolerant plant suitable for rain gardens. Attract amphibians to your gardens. Now, this is not strictly speaking a garden project where you're planting something, but amphibians are so great. And if you'd planned and implemented a rain garden, it's perfect. Amphibian populations have been declining all over the world, and they're an important part of our ecosystem. Encouraging amphibian activity is beneficial to the garden because amphibians are predators of many insects that can damage ornamental plants and vegetables. I also included it for those children who are interested in bugs and snakes and other amphibians, and will learn first how to find them and attract them and maintain them in the garden. Amphibians spend their time in meadows, pastures, wooded and urban areas, and in fact, a rough-skinned newt really lives in an area of about 12 by 12. Their environment is dwindling as we move more and more into their habitat areas and disrupt pathways to water sources with roads and sidewalks. They spend their time near water, but only use those water ponded areas to lay their eggs. The pond doesn't need to be big, but it needs to be shaded with plants to allow for minimum algae growth, and the plants will give them a place to attach their eggs. This shaded, moist habitat will invite snakes, rough-skinned newts, tree frogs, as well as spiders and other insects. Walk around your yard, find a place that meets the criteria. Let your imagination and ingenuity go when looking for items to enhance your amphibian habitat. They like rotting logs, pots that are dark and they can hide in. This is where children really shine. A little research on garden snakes, Pacific chorus frogs, and rough-skinned newts may be helpful, but I have a feeling that they will be able to do that very quickly. You'll be the support team, helping them find appropriate materials and an area of the yard that you give your stamp of approval to. I've included book titles here that will be informative, but there will be many more available in your library. I can't say it enough. Just like you, the children need to learn the how-to and the whys before starting a project in the garden. And we are so lucky to have so many resources at our fingertips. Modeling how to research information and keeping notes about the important aspects of your garden is key. If you do it, the children will value that practice. They've seen it in action. Captivating facts and the engaging storylines are key to keeping them engaged and on track. Research is superior to trial and error. However, I've certainly engaged in my share about trial and error. Finding the right resources can be very important. I caution you that there are many internet sites out there that may give you incorrect information. So please model being careful in your selection of sources. Always try to locate a science-based educational source, and a university is perfect. I've given you a few activities to consider. There are so many more. The goal is to engage the children in gardening activities of their interest. The time spent together should be positive, with lots of feedback to give them motivation for learning and doing more. Asking for their opinion makes them feel valued, and incorporating their suggestions should be of paramount importance. They should feel proud as some of the tasks I outlined take commitment and physical stamina. So whether you're working with a neighborhood child, grandchild, or your own children, you're building a future gardener. Hours of gardening fun await you. I hope I've given you a couple of ideas to intrigue you. Here are some of the resources I used when preparing this presentation. 10-minute university handouts are informative and answer common questions for all the gardeners. I also recommend you check out the 10-minute university video library. There are wonderful videos about pollinator gardens, attracting pollinators, vegetable gardening, starting vegetables from seed, all of them excellent and contain specific information about how to. I want to thank Sean Van Dorn for posting the links throughout the presentation and to the great 10-minute university support team. And now I believe we have time for some questions if there are any.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Jane.
Hi there. Okay, we do have just a couple questions. That was so good. I can't wait to do some of those activities with the grandkids.
Good.
One person wants to know what kinds of seeds their plants can grow. They have young children and they want something that's going to grow very fast. So what sort of seeds?
Perfect question. Sunflower seeds work great. Sunflower seeds, radish seeds. If you want to plant vegetables, radishes, leaf lettuce seeds grow really quickly. Spinach is another good choice. Flowers, marigolds, sunflowers, poppies, and sweet peas.
Okay, great. That should have answered it then. Someone wants to know, are there any open gardens or any botanical gardens? This person lives here in the Pacific Northwest, actually in the Portland metro area, and wants to know if there's any place free around here that they can take the kids to show them these things.
There are a lot of public gardens. To see a vegetable garden in action, the community garden up at Clackamas Community College, I know is open and has wide pathways so the children can walk through and see what kinds of things are being grown there and maybe inspire them to grow something there. Many of the other community gardens have locked gates and you can't access them. Mary S. Young Park has a pollinator garden that's fun to see. And Milwaukee Center has gardens too. So those places would be good ones to check out.
Okay, great. You talked a lot about the seed planting, but this person wants to know about propagating a plant from a cutting. She heard that geraniums are pretty easy to propagate from a cutting. Is there anything else that they can propagate, and kind of when should they do that?
Good question. That's a great question. And I have to admit that I didn't do a lot of propagating cuttings with my grandchildren, but hydrangeas are really, really easy to do. Grapes are easy to do. I'm just thinking of some of the hardwood cuttings like azaleas, those kinds of things, a little bit more difficult. So I picked those things which are soft, like hydrangeas, grapes, and as you said, geraniums are perfect too.
Okay. All right. You had that glass container for the worms, and I'm going to try that one out. That sounds really neat. But this person actually wanted to know about planting seeds in a glass container because they wanted to let the roots, watch the roots grow, but they were worried, would the light bother the roots, or is that going to matter? I mean, can that be done? Can you plant seeds in a glass container to watch the roots?
Right, you can very easily. In fact, I used to use clear plastic containers with a hole punched in the bottom for the kids to put their seedlings in because the roots come to the side and they can see the roots grow. But one really fun activity I did was, and this was a aims on science activity, take a damp paper towel and put 2 seeds on the paper towel with some tape, making sure it's put the seeds on with tape first, then spray the paper towel with water, put it in the Ziploc bag, tape it to a window, and you can see the seeds germinating that way. And if the window is what's great about that one is if the window is too cold, they'll just mold and rot because it's not a warm enough temperature. So if you have it on a sunny window with adequate light and the temperature's warm enough outside, you'll see them germinate. And the question always was, what'll happen first? Will the root go down first or will the sprout come up? I mean, they love that activity and it's perfect.
All right. Well, that's all the questions we had, Cheryl, but that was such a complete information. So do you have anything else to tell our public?
I think I've covered it. I probably
I think you
overwhelmed them.
have
Oh,
too.
oh, there is one other garden you can visit. And the Oregon Trail has a heritage garden, and that's free to visit too. And that might be kind of fun for them. Field trips are always fun.
That's great. Okay, well, hopefully, Cheryl, you and I will be at the Spring Garden Fair this coming weekend. So we
There you
hope that
go.
some of the people that were visiting, watching your webinar today will be there to come by and say hello.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Jane.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you, Cheryl. Bye-bye.